Okay. So welcome. Thank you all for being here. I'm really excited to teach this one-off session on writing sermons. And several of you have given sermons at B'nai Tikva before, for which I'm very grateful. But this is something where I think all of us really appreciate both having tips and sharing tips, and also knowing what is possible, and expanding our horizons a little. So I want to start off. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully people got the materials in advance, but we'll also put them on the website with the recording. So there are a number of different types of sermons, and I want to go over just what are some of the possibilities for length and content, and then get into style a little bit, and then share some tips and tricks. So I think the one that most people are most familiar with is a Dvar Torah. So usually it's on the Parsha, the Torah portion for the week, but some people also do something on the Haftorah or on a Megillah that we're reading for a particular holiday. So you might do a Devar on the Book of Ruth or Ecclesiastes, if that's something that you're interested in. But there are other possibilities. People expect a Devar as part of a service, but it doesn't necessarily have to be on a piece of scripture that we were reading from a scroll. It can also be a prayer that we were saying. Why do we say the Shema? Why do we say the Amidah? Why do we have certain choreography for the Amidah? Um, how long have we been saying Psuke de Zimra, and how do we choose which psalms to say and which ones to leave on the cutting room floor? Another possibility is what's called a Devar Halacha. Um, why do we do a particular ritual practice? I've done a Devar on mezuzot at one point. And definitely when holidays are coming up, a lot of times it can be helpful to talk about why are we celebrating this holiday and what are some ways to make it more meaningful? Or how is it celebrated around the world, or how has it been celebrated in the past? There are two other things that you might be asked to do at some point. So I just want to have them in the mix. One is called a vort. This is something that a lot of rabbis are asked to keep in their back pocket for if you're going to some kind of celebration and you need to just give a 1 minute talk, 1 to 5 minutes on a particular thing. What's a little bit of Torah you can share? What's a little bit of insight? Um, and another is a kavanah. And you see me do this often during services where I'll just say a sentence or two before prayer or sometimes after it on why we say this particular prayer or how we can get a little deeper into its meaning, just so that people can have a little more emotional connection and intention as they say the prayer. Um, so I'm just gonna stop share for a second and see if people have any questions about any of these sermon types. Try to give you a nice variety. And okay, looks like people are pretty happy with that, so let's move on. You can also put questions in the chat as we're going, and I'll work them into what I'm saying. So there's a rabbi named Dick Israel. May his memory be a blessing. He died young, but he wrote a number of books and articles before that, including a book called The Kosher Pig, in which he had an article on 7 possible frameworks for writing a Devar Torah. What kind of structures can you use, or should you not use? And these are not the only structures that are available. There are other models that you might use, but it's a good toolkit for people. So one possibility is the microscope. Um, oh, there's a question. Is it customary to announce what kind of sermon you would give? No. It's up to you to figure out what is expected for that particular week, or for that particular occasion. Sometimes, if I'm doing a Dvar tefillah or a Dvar halacha, if I'm getting into something that's not part of the weekly parsha, I usually start off by saying, I'm going to change things up a little bit by talking about X, just so that people know not to be listening for details from the Torah portion, but instead like, oh, we're talking about X today. But if you're doing what people are expecting, you don't need to announce like, "Hey, I'm giving you what you expect." So depends on the circumstance. It's a really good question. Um, so uh, um, so then we've got these different structures. So one of them is the microscope. And that's where we look at one word or phrase and what is some of the interpretation of it, the classical interpretation or modern interpretation, and what can we learn from it? So, one sample that you've heard us talking about the last couple of weeks, myself and Reb Nikki, has been the phrase "pakod yifkod," that Joseph says on his deathbed, and then God and Moses say as their bona fides that they are ready to take the people out of Egypt. So, when does this phrase show up, and what does it mean? Another possibility is the first word of Leviticus. The book of Leviticus begins with the word Vayikra, but the A is tiny. And if you spell it with the aleph, rather, it has a different meaning than if you spell it without. And so there's some interpretation about um, what does it mean if we take it one way or if we take it the other way? How does that change our understanding of what's going on? So another possibility is the airplane. Looking at the arc of what's in the parsha, what's there, what's not there. So, for instance, if we've got a long list of laws, particularly laws of, let's say, uh, civil damages. Um, what can it tell us about how law and order was kept and what the idea of property meant, what it meant to be in community and to be responsible to each other, and what isn't there that we might assume, oh, this is obviously something that any society would have rules about. Why is it not here? Is it not here because it's so obvious that it doesn't bear mentioning? Or is it not here because this is actually something where our assumptions differ from the assumptions of our ancestors about what this law category is? A third possibility is what's called a diving board. So you take an idea in the text just as a jumping off point, and most of your devar is about this other thing that interests you. So there's a sentence in the Torah, which Reb Nikki used in one of her classes on Judaism environmentalism, on the idea that you can't cut down fruit trees during a siege of a city. And then talking about what does that say about our responsibility to be good stewards of our environment? If we've got all of the generations of Esau or the tribe of Judah, that can be something where you talk about Jewish genealogy or the history of your family. That can be an interesting jumping off point as well. There's a related type that Rabbi Dick Israel warns about called the snuff box, um, which is there was a particular rabbi who had only one good devar in him, and it was for Korach. And he would be invited to speak in different places on different weeks. And just as he was getting up to deliver his Dvar, he would pat his coat and say, "My snuff box, it's disappeared. It's been swallowed up by the earth, like Korah." And speaking of Korah, and he just used that as an abrupt and rather crude segue into the one thing that he had to talk about. So you want to avoid doing something that is that forced. You want to genuinely tie it into something that that's part of the parsha or the holiday, something that's going on that's timely. Another possibility is what's called the biblical personality. So you can analyze a particular biblical figure or relationship. For example, why are Moses and Aaron able to work together and get along in a way that none of the other siblings in the Torah seem able to do? Uh, why are there so many parallels between Rebecca's leaving her family to join the Jewish people and Abraham leaving his home in the previous weeks? A third possibility. Sorry, we're up to number six, rather. The puzzle. This is one that I often use as well. You can look at an odd contradiction in the text or a repetition of a particular idea or story or phrase. What's going on there? Um, so, for instance, light is created on the first day, but the sun and moon are created on the fourth. So, what's that earlier light? And often the rabbis have beaten you there and have different ideas about what is actually going on. And you can talk about which of their uh, um, ideas seems to resonate most with you and why. And finally, the historian. You can look at a piece of biblical text in its historical context. So, for instance, there are some scholars who have noted that the covenant at Sinai is very close in form to Near Eastern fealty oaths between member states and the empire that was governing them. And what does that say about our ongoing relationship with God? What possibilities does it open or close for us? Um, why does it matter to us? Another possibility I've been wanting forever to do a Dvar comparing the priesthood in ancient Egypt with the priesthood that we see in the Torah. How are they similar, and what do the differences say about our relationship with our God as opposed to their relationship with their gods? Um, so I'm going to stop the share for a second and see what thoughts people have about these types. I realize it's a lot of different types. Um, and like, some people have one particular structure that works well for the kinds of ideas that they want to share. And for other people, this is something where they like to mix it up and to see like, I did something historical last time. I want to do a puzzle this time. Can you mix and match types? I there is some, there is a little bit of blending that can happen. You want to be careful not to introduce so many ideas that your audience can't follow you. Remember that people who are listening to something orally can't go back and um, remind themselves what you were talking about earlier. They have to hold everything in their heads. And they can get frustrated if they're trying to hold too much in their heads and they can't follow what you're saying. So any of these rules can be broken, but you want to do so judiciously and you want to think about what is the impact of that on your listener. Other questions, other thoughts? Andrew, it looks like you have a thing that's on your mind.
I was trying to decide whether, how do you know whether the snuff box thing just makes sense only in your head and nowhere else?
Right, right. How can you tell if this is a genuine connection between the material and your ideas, or whether you've got these cool ideas and they don't really relate? Um, I think part of it is this is where it can be good to have a first reader. Can you read this out to someone that you trust or show it to someone that you trust and see if they're able to follow your logic? And if they're like, I don't see the connection, it could be that it's more in your head, and you can see if it's possible to articulate more of that on the page and make sure that it's explicit. And if you can't, then yeah, you may need to toss that idea or save it for another time. I have a an enormous scrap file of ideas that were too good to let go of, but that didn't work in a particular sermon. And by putting them aside but not deleting them, I avoid giving myself writer's block, because if you tell yourself that you're going to delete anything that doesn't work yet, you can shut yourself completely down and not be able to move forward. Mitch, you unmuted. Do you have something to say?
Well, aside from the fact that the light that was the Big Bang, when you talked about,
So you're bringing up the light that was the Big Bang
yeah,
as the answer
yeah, right,
to the question of light
right,
on one day but not another.
but aside from that, there are some speakers, not rabbis and other speakers, that feel that they have multiple points that they want to get across in one time period, and so using the reference of the snuff box will or something will lead them into one particular topic. Several minutes later, there'll be another key word that will take them into another idea. And after three or four changes, as the listener, you are wondering where they're going with the whole thing because they haven't really tied the individual topics together. It would be much better to make one or two important points in one particular talk rather than try to say everything that you feel that day
Yeah,
in
so
this.
we're going there next, Mitch. You're
Yeah.
anticipating. So yeah, again, you want to be conscious that people can only hold so much in their heads. And if you have a ton of ideas that don't quite fit together, save some of them for another year, or another Parsha. You don't need to throw every cool idea into one sermon. And especially if you want to do this more than once in your lifetime, better not to throw in every cool idea. You may want to keep some in your pocket for next time. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? Okay. Moving on. All right. So we've talked about the different types. I want to talk about writing process. And I should say, as a huge caveat, um, different people work in different ways. So if this doesn't work for you and you have another way to get to a really cool sermon, that's wonderful. Um, do what works for you. But here are some possibilities for the ways that many people's brains work. You want to start by reading the Parsha, or looking at the prayer that you're going to talk about, or the rules for the holiday, whatever it is. What catches your attention? You want to take notes on what occurs to you, ask questions, keep ideas, and just kind of brainstorm what are all of the possible things that you could talk about. Um, I set myself a challenge when I was an intern that I wanted to try and talk only about what was in that year's triennial portion for each parsha whenever possible, so that I didn't accidentally talk about the same cool idea multiple years in a row, forgetting that I had already talked about that, just because that's where my attention went. If you're doing a one-off, that's not really something that you need to worry about. But yeah, you're going to want to choose one central idea. How you choose what's most appealing to you, think about where your energy is. When you're looking over your notes or when you're looking over the parsha, when do you feel most awake and excited? That's a good sign. If you're excited by what your ideas are, other people probably will be too. If you're bored, other people will be bored. If you're confused, you may want to do a puzzle and figure out, like, this confused me. Can I make sense of it for myself and for you? You can juxtapose two ideas at most in a Dvar of 10 to 20 minutes. You don't want to juxtapose more than two ideas. If you're narrowing things down, you want to think about what connects with each other, and you want to think about, why is this idea important to you? What's at stake for you? Um, why does it matter to you? That'll teach you why it matters to your audience. So when you've narrowed down your topic, or your idea, you want to look at what other sources have said about this particular passage or character idea. I'll give some lists of sources later. Um, but you can also go personal. Um, why is this idea important to you? When have you experienced something similar to this in your own life? So, for some people, you're going to want to talk about, okay, sibling rivalry or spreading rumors comes up in this Dvar, in this Parsha. I want to talk about rumors. When have I experienced the damage that rumors can do in my own life? Or what's a story that I know about the damage of gossip? Um, so once you've done that brainstorming and a little bit of research, you're going to want to start writing. Think about how much summary of the Parsha or the holiday you actually need to orient people. Because your audience is going to assume that anything you explicitly mention is going to be important later. If we're reading Triennial Cycle and we're just talking about one particular scene, and you're going to be talking about that in your Devar, or even if you're talking about something that was elsewhere in the Parsha, but you're only talking about one character or one scene, you don't need to summarize the entire Parsha, because people are going to be trying to hold on to those details and think like, wait, what does the Tower of Babel have to do with Noah on the ark? And it's like, no, I just want to talk about Noah on the ark. Fine, leave out the Tower of Babel. Not important. Um, so, uh, so that's something to consider. How much summary do you need, just to ground people? You're going to want to introduce your idea. Some people do it at the very top. Some people do it after they've given a bit of summary. You know, in this week's Parsha, so and so does this. Why is it important that they do that? Or why do they do it that way? That can be a way to introduce your idea. It's not the only way. Um, you're going to want to say what you think and add supporting details from the text and from other sources, which can include your own life experience. Linda, I'm gonna stop the share for a second. You have a question?
Yes, the answer to this question might be ask the rabbi or ask Dina, but the question is there another way for us to find out, like online or something, if we're doing a triennial reading, which part we're actually doing this year?
That is a really good question. Thank you. Um, So, if you're wondering what Parsha we're doing on a particular week, and which part of the triennial reading, there are a few places that you can look for this. One is called Hebcal, and I'm going to put that in the chat. Um, so that's an online resource. It has a date converter, but it also has a list of both the full reading and the triennial reading for any particular week. And you can look ahead and figure out, okay, what's going on there. Another place, if you type HeapCal into Google, you will find it. It's .com. And another place that has what's where. Actually, HeapCal is probably the easiest place for this. Um, so yeah, if you go, I'm going to share my screen and just show you the HeapCal website. And let's see if we can do this. So, and when in doubt, absolutely, you can ask myself, you can ask Dina or Ellie. But on the HeapCal website, you see there's a calendar here and a date converter. Um, and there's Torah readings. So you can look at the readings for this Hebrew year or this week. Let's look at this week. So this is Parshat Vayera. And we're in triennial year 3, and we're going from verse 8:16 to 9:35. And it also tells you the Haftorah or the alternate Haftorah. Alternatively, you can look at readings for 5785, and it'll give you the full list for this year, and you can scroll down to a particular week and say, I signed up in advance to give a Dvar for Parshat Naso on June 7th. I'm going to click on that. And here's the triennial reading for Parshat Naso. We're doing chapter 7. And chapter 7 seems to be very long. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Nancy, hi. And then Janet. You're muted. Hold on.
Marshall, go ahead. Go ahead.
Nancy, you're still muted.
Hello, can you hear me?
Wait.
Okay. I was having trouble unmuting. Sorry.
It's
No.
I was
okay.
having trouble unmuting. So, two things. One is if you get the USCJ calendar every year, they have on there every week what the Torah reading is, what the triennial is, what the Haftarah is. What you just showed is fascinating, though. I really love that. But the question I have is that when it says, sorry, I have a cold.
It's
When
okay.
it gives the triennial, we typically only have 3 aliyot on a Shabbat. So does that
Right.
cover all of the triennial?
So, when I'm looking at what I can give a Devar on and I'm sticking to the triennial, you are not forced to stick to the triennial if you don't want to. Um, you can look at what are the first 3 aliyot. That's generally what we do, with the exception of the Song at the Sea and the Ten Commandments. Anytime we're doing those, that's the piece that we're focused on. So again, you can focus on that piece of the Parsha and just trust that that's what we're going to be reading. Yeah. Yeah.
And also we could talk about anything else in the Parsha as well, though.
A
Yeah.
100%. But
Okay.
where you're at an advantage with being aware of what's in the first three aliyot is that you can trust that people have read that this morning, and that there's also been an intro to the Torah portion that's talked about those three aliyot. And so you can give less introductory detail in your Dvar, because you know that everyone is very familiar with that piece. But if you're talking about something that's later in the triennial, or if you're talking about something that's in a different triennial section, then yeah, you're going to want to give a little more detail. That's all.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I would also say, uh, um, it's often the case that when I'm doing a Devar, I give a little bit of context because some of our parshas are cliffhangers. And so I may be drawing on details from 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I may want to give those details as well, just to set people up. Like, oh, right, Jacob was on the run because he stole Esau's birthright and, and the blessing. And now he's coming home, and this is the first time that they're confronting each other since then. Just one possibility. Janet.
Open up.
Actually, it was Marshall and
Ah, hi,
Nancy.
Marshall.
How you doing? Nancy just had. I had the same question Nancy had, so I'm all set.
Oh, great. Okay. Arthur, did you have a hand up? You're on mute.
Oh, there we go. What was it? I'm sorry. What was your question?
Did you have a question? It looked
Um,
like you had your hand up.
I didn't have my hand up, but I just have a comment.
Sure.
Uh, for me, anything, no matter what you call it, a Vator or sermon or whatever, I think it's important to tie it into something that's going on today. Um, because the lessons, if they just stay with the biblical um, uh, commentary. I, I, although it's nice to know, I don't think it does much for you in terms of, making your life better. But if you
Yeah.
can, if you can tie it into something that's happening today, I think it's very important. Just my personal comment on it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're getting there. You're raising something very important, which is this is not just a lecture or a term paper. This is supposed to give people some spiritual nourishment, and there are a few ways to do that, but one way is to tie it into current events or people's lives.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
over the years, I know that the people I'm friendly with have been friendly with at the temple, enjoyed the sermons where what I'm talking about actually happened. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
I think it helps bring more people into the temple as well.
I agree. I agree. Thank you, Arthur.
Okay.
Okay. So, Mitch, do you have a question?
No, but I'd like to comment on Arthur's comment.
Let's not go too far afield.
No, just very quick, just short. Two summers
Uh,
ago, a hot nut.
Mitch, we'll have time at the end.
All right,
Okay,
no
write it
problem.
down, save it. Okay, Dina, you have a question?
I have more of a comment for people who decide that they want to talk on the Haftarah and go
Mm,
to Hebcal. I want people to know that we do not use the alternative Haftarah that's listed in Hebcal. They do a Haftarah based on the content of the triennial portion, and we don't follow that. However, if you're planning to do the Haftorah, you might want to check with the rabbi or me, because if the Ashkenazi Haftorah is very long and the Sephardi is shorter, we do the Sephardi Haftorah. So there's a little bit of, back and forth there. So if you decide to talk about a Haftorah, please check with either me or the rabbi.
Pro tip. Thank you, because that is a quirk of our particular congregation. So thank you. Okay, moving on. I'm going to reshare. So we're still talking about the writing process. We're going to get into some of these content ideas in a moment. So we've introduced the idea. We've brought in supporting details from the text and other sources, which can include your own life experience or current events. What is your idea's implications for your audience? We're anticipating what Arthur was just talking about. Why should we care? So you're going to want to think about why does this matter? Why is this not just a nifty idea to prove how intelligently you've read the Parsha? It's what are the implications of this? Um, so, for instance, we talk about Moses not being a man of words, and some people think that means he had some sort of speech impediment or his lips had been burned as a child. They stuttered. Uh, The rabbis have other possibilities as well, including that Moses was afraid that if he couldn't speak perfectly in every language on earth, if Pharaoh or one of Pharaoh's courtiers could stump him and he'd lose control of the situation. And so we might talk about the perils of perfectionism. Um, how how does perfectionism and the perfect become the enemy of the good and keep us from doing what we need to do? So that's something that then can resonate with your audience. How is the ending of a sermon different from a term paper? So one way to end a sermon is to bring your idea full circle, to go back to something nifty you said in the beginning, offer a final quote or a brief anecdote that has some wisdom or some humor. Um, for a last sentence, I often either close with a blessing, may we all experience some of the positives that I've talked about or avoid some of the negatives that I've talked about, or a question, something you want people to ponder, or a call to action. Um, how have the ideas that I've talked about and how they matter in your own life, what does that make you do? If this is about famous last words, how are you having those important conversations with people you care about before it's too late? If it's about civic engagement, what are you doing in this upcoming election to try and make a better world? All of those things. I will add as a slight warning to that, because churches and synagogues are nonprofit and there is a separation of church and state. Um, if you are talking about a current political issue, you can talk about how the underlying meat of the issue matters, um, but you can't tell people to vote for a particular candidate, or vote yes or no on a particular political measure. All you can do is raise the issues and talk about what are the values at stake. Um, so, uh, Revision. We talked a little bit about this earlier. It's always good to show your stuff to a friend or a trusted partner, or to read it out loud. I still show important sermons to people who have a good eye. Uh, Try reading it out loud. And if you keep tripping over the same phrase, change that phrase. You're going to trip over it on the bema. Don't do that. Don't do that to yourself. If you keep running out of air in the middle of a sentence, shorten your sentences or figure out where you can break up clauses. If you lose track of what you're saying and it becomes too convoluted, and as you're talking, you've lost track of what's before it or after it, you may want to change your phrasing, revise the flow, or rethink your ideas. I'm going to stop share for a second. What questions do people have? No questions. We've got some pros here. Okay, moving on. So, these are some suggestions. These are not rules, but they are recommendations. These are things that I find useful when I give a sermon. Bring at least one outside source. It could be rabbinic commentary, midrash, a contemporary author, a story, a Hasidic tale, your own life. Um, and to that point, people enjoy hearing stories, either something from your own life or something going on in the news, something in Jewish history or Jewish legend. Um, it's a good way to keep people's attention. It's not required, but it's a tool for your tool bag. When possible, if you're offering ideas, you want to include some specific, meaningful details to back up those ideas. So you don't just want to say, um, Jacob takes the long view and Esau is just in the moment and all about the short term. Or Moses is strict and Aaron is lenient. You want to look at, okay, how does this play out? Moses is the one who punishes people after the golden calf, and Aaron is the one who allows the golden calf to happen on his watch. Why is that? Why can't he stand up to the people the way that Moses does? Are there any advantages to that? What are the disadvantages? How does that play out in the story? Um, Remember that your audience is expecting some kind of wisdom or spiritual nourishment. This is not just about um, what is the most erudite you can be. This is about why does this matter? Consider what you want people to take away from your talk. And this is something really important because of the power differential of the Bima. If you start telling people what to do, they only have two choices if they don't already agree with what you're saying. And if they agree with what you're saying, then you're kind of preaching to the choir. If they don't agree with what you're saying, they can physically walk out of the room, or they can shut down and sort of mentally take themselves out. And either way, you've lost your audience. Raising questions or offering different possibilities and showing why we should care about those different possibilities is a better way to reach people um, so that they can think about this and come to those perspectives on their own. And if they genuinely disagree with you, they can see this as an honest disagreement between two people. They don't feel like you're coming down on them with the full force of God. Uh, it's just not it's not effective. It's not helpful. Um, Similarly, uh, there's a piece of wisdom that I heard from a few RRC students. This is something that's taught there that I find very wise. Um, Teach from scars, not wounds. If you have a personal stake in a particular issue, consider whether you're ready to talk about your experience or not. Um, Several years ago, a week or two before I started my internship at B'nai Tikva, I had a terrible car accident. I flipped my car over on the pike because I was driving in a hurricane, which I talked about on High Holidays. It's taken 3 years to get to the point where I'm comfortable talking about that honestly. I wasn't ready before that. And there are other issues in my life I may never be ready to talk about, and that's okay. I'll talk about other issues that matter to me. Don't put yourself in a position where you're going to be revealing a terrible vulnerability and risk either, PTSD on the bema or someone coming up to you afterwards and arguing with you about something that is too painful for you to argue about. And you also want to think about, is this something you want the whole community to know about you? Um, it's sometimes yes, sometimes no. You want to think about if you're ready for that. Be sensitive to the fact that people in your audience may have personal experience with issues that are just theoretical to you. Substance use disorder, mental illness, sexual violence, domestic violence, PTSD, combat experience. Um, the law of averages says that anything that's in the Torah, with the exception of, watching the seas part, and even there, if you ask people what miracles they've experienced in their lives, they can probably tell you some. Um, don't don't just talk about the experience of a character in a cavalier way. Um, if you're talking about Noah's drunkenness, remember that there may be people struggling with alcoholism or taking care of family members who struggle with alcoholism. This is not theoretical to everyone. And related to that, Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum, who was the rabbi at CBST in New York for many years, taught Sharon Cohen Anisfeld, my teacher, Rabbi Sharon Cohen Anisfeld, that it's morally irresponsible to leave people in a pit. You can take your Dvar to a dark place. You can name some of the terrible evils of our time. But you can't just stop there saying the world is terrible and we should all feel horrible about it. Or this text is awful and there's no redemption for it. You need to end with some kind of tikkun, some kind of healing or repair. And this is often when I cut something, it's either because it's totally unrelated to the main idea of my topic, or because it's taking me to a dark place and I can't see a way out. And I can't leave people in that dark place. That's morally irresponsible. So I'm going to stop share again. A lot of ideas there. Uh, Any questions about how to do this well or what's sort of teetering on the edge? Like, is this allowed? Is this not allowed? Okay. Just going to let the idea soak in. Nancy, you're muted. Yep.
I know this is a new iPad and new everything, and so I'm gonna have to work around here. So since the topic here was suggestions for head and heart, I just wanted to offer that for me, when I'm doing a Dvar and it coincides with a yard site or something, it gives me extra feeling in my heart to teach in memory of someone that I loved. And
Mm.
and I just, if I may, for just 1 minute, when I was teaching in religious school, many decades, well, just after Peter died, actually, so almost 14 years ago. And my brother-in-law of blessed memory told me when I didn't want to go back to teach, he said, you need to teach. You need to teach. And when you teach Torah, he said, do it in memory of Peter. He said, just do it quietly to yourself. Say something quietly. It's in memory of Peter. And so I decided to do it, but not do it quietly. And I told my children, my students, that what we were learning in Torah was in memory of my husband. And one after another, the children started raising their hands. Can we learn in memory of my great grandmother who died? And can we learn in memory of this one and that one? And it was one of the most beautiful moments in my teaching when I realized how important it is to do something like that. So for me, it means a lot. I just wanted to pass on if I know these are ideas in case someone wants to do a Dvar, but I think that might be a really meaningful time if someone wanted to.
Yeah, thank you for that. So, some people, the idea that they have, they try and connect it to the memory of the particular person that they're doing this in honor of. So, what is some wisdom that your mother taught you, and how does it relate to this parsha or something like that? And again, talking about scars and wounds. When to do that explicitly and say, I'm doing this in honor of my loved one, or this is something that I'm connecting to my loved one who I lost. Um, and when to just have that be less explicit. You may think about, am I going to completely lose it up there on the beam and not be able to get my calm back and keep going? But I know that when you teach, whatever you teach from the heart. Um, so and that goes back again to, how is this more than just a term paper? Why should we care about this? How is this sacred? Other questions about what we just raised? Um, okay. So moving on. So, and again, like, those tips and tricks that I just shared are suggestions, not rules. It's things that I and other people have found useful. But it's not something that necessarily you need uh, to go by, strictly, if it feels like I can break this, but again, consider the cost of breaking it, whatever it is. So, where to find classical sources on things? Um, there are places, there's something called the Commentator's Bible, which is a translation of a lot of the classical commentators on each and every parsha. If you don't have access to that, a lot of the same material is available through Sepharia.org. So I'm going to stop share for a second, and I'm going to bring up Sepharia on my website. This is something that I always have at the ready, so I'm going to share it. Oh, there we go. Okay, so we have this week's Torah portion right here in the margins on Sepharia, but let's say you're doing something for a few weeks out. So we do Tanakh. At the top, we have the 5 books of Moses. If you go down, you have the whole rest of the Tanakh. And we're going to go to Exodus. And right now, we have the chapters of Exodus. But if you go down a little further, you have each of the Torah portions, and it even breaks it down by Aliyah. And let's say we want to talk about Parshat Mishpatim. That's in a few weeks. And here I have it set up so I have both the Hebrew and the English text interleaved with each other. And let's say that you want to talk about the process of freeing a slave and why we pierce the ear of the slave who refuses to go free. So we click on that particular verse, and we have some possibilities here. And here we have commentary. And let's look at Rashi. Here are all of the different Rashis on this particular verse. And if you go back to the text and you scroll down, it then says, what's the Rashi on the next verse? So you can use that, and then you can go back on the commentary. Let's look at what Ramban Nachmanides said on this. And again, we've got a nice long thing, and you can use this to go through the classical commentators and see what they say about a particular verse. So, and if you want to search particularly for a topic, let's say uh, washing of the hands. So here are some notable sources on Safaria, and you can look at all sources if you want to get more variety. And you can click on any of those sources, and it'll take you to, oh, this is in the Mishnah Chagiga, and this is the thing that was quoted. And here's what's before and after that in the text if I need a little more context. And I can click on this. There's commentary. And here's where it connects to the Talmud, because we're in the Mishnah. And what does the Talmud do with this idea? And you can do any of that. Where it says sheets here, this also lists every source sheet on Safaria that people have used this source in. So you can click on um, what this person said and what are all of the sources that they put together on this particular thing. So you can go down the rabbit hole forever and ever on this. I'm going to stop share and bring us back to the sheet, but that should give you a sense of just how much is on Safaria. It has it. They're trying to put on it every text, both in the original and in translation, that anyone might find useful to Jewish text study. And they've got quite a few of them already, which is pretty impressive. And every week there's new emails saying, "Hey, we just put up this source as well." Very, very cool. So, just as a recommendation, um, if you're on Safaria, Rashi, Ramban, which is Nachmanides, and Ibn Ezra are often the key commentators to look at. Midrash Rabbah and Midrash Tanhuma, if you were to scroll down on that side menu, you would see Midrash and Halacha as options. So Midrash Rabbah and Midrash Tanhuma are where I get some of the coolest stories. There's also a site, thetorah.com. It's articles by modern scholars, organized both by Parsha and by holiday where relevant. So if you want to see 20 different articles on the priestly blessing or on Parshat Vayera, you can do that. Um, and you can also go and see like what a particular scholar has said about a number of different sources. Again, it's great for a deep dive. Some texts that I have available that you can borrow from me. We may have copies in the library, and public libraries may also have copies of these. These are hugely useful. So one is Torah Women's Commentary. It's one volume, and it's set up with an introductory essay to each parsha, commentary at the bottom, the way you would have an Eitz Chaim, a final set of essays by different scholars, and poetry on each and every parsha. Um, I think all of you are familiar with the Eitz Chaim that we have. It has great commentary on the Parsha, and it can give you some suggestions of where to look next. Sometimes I look at Eitz Chaim and then say, oh, they say that Rashi has some interesting things to say about this. Why don't I go on Safari and say what exactly Rashi said? The JPS Torah commentary series is also really useful. That's individual volumes for each and every book of the Torah, uh, with essays at the end about things that are useful. So, for instance, in the book of Numbers, there's a scene where Moses says, I can't do this by myself any longer, and God makes the 70 elders all prophesy. And so there's an essay at the end of the JPS Torah commentary for the book of Numbers on what exactly does that mean? And where else do we see people prophesying and speaking in tongues? And how are they treated by people in their context? So King Saul does that at one point. Why is King Saul doing that, and how is that related to the elders? Um, Legends of the Jews by Louis Ginsberg. Rabbi Louis Ginsberg put together volumes on all of the midrash that he could find on different biblical figures, sort of merging them into long form stories. But the notes section at the back, the index, is a great smorgasbord of, okay, where did he get this story? Where did he get that story? And you're able to look at the original text. So that's also something useful. New studies in Torah, new studies in Genesis, new studies in Exodus, are volumes by Nechama Leibowitz, who is a modern scholar. And she's put together source sheets for different topics for each and every parsha of like, what does this 18th century commentator have to say about this? And how does that compare to what this 16th century commentator said about that same idea? Aviva Zornberg has volumes of literary and psychological criticism on the first four books of the Torah. And they're organized by Parsha. She leans heavily on Rashi, but she brings in other commentators, and she does this kind of literary analysis deep dive of um, why is this word being used here, and how has this theme threaded through this person's life? It's really extraordinary scholarship, and I highly recommend it. Um, and two final thoughts, and these are from my mom. Anytime I'm nervous about delivering a Dvar or doing anything important in public, remember to breathe and remember to have fun. So I'm going to stop share and give us time for questions. I realize this has been a lot. Linda, please.
I already asked you this, but I'm going to ask it again. So let's say we've done all our research and we're ready to sit down and write. Average Dvar Torah, about how many minutes, and how does that translate to either how many words or how many pages? You know, how do you know if you're writing something, you know, what's a good length?
Yeah, great question. This is going to differ depending on circumstance. So, a Saturday morning Dvar, you're looking at 10 to 20 minutes. That's enough to do a meaty idea for people, not enough for them to get fidgety and frustrated and really hungry for Kiddush. Um, Friday night, I try to do 5 to 10 minutes. If I'm doing a high holiday introduction, we're talking more like 3 to 5 minutes, aiming for 4 minutes. A good way of eyeballing this is it takes roughly a minute to say 100 words. So if you've got 500 words, that's probably a 5 minute talk. Um, you may want to time yourself. I've been known to use the stopwatch function on my phone to see where I need to cut if I'm over time, and I think it's going to be annoying for people to hear that much, or if I feel like I'm not giving them enough and I need to build things out. Uh, Also, rule of thumb, especially in the beginning, it will take at least an hour of writing for you to come up with a minute of a usable talk. Over time, you may polish it up so it takes less than that, but don't be surprised if it takes more. And especially if you fold in reading and research time and brainstorming, this can take quite a while. Don't beat yourself up for how long it takes. And give yourself that time. Don't feel like this is something to do at the last minute. And then, it's like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing and it's due tomorrow. Um, is it acceptable to do something shorter for a first-time writer? Absolutely. My dad's rule of thumb for giving sermons is you want to spend the time that you need to say what's worthwhile saying. If what you have for a Saturday morning is wonderful, but it's over in 5 minutes, you know what? As long as people are eagerly eating up what you have to say, no one's going to mind getting to Kiddush a minute or two early. Um, if you've got a really complex idea, but you feel like you really need all of the moving parts in order to get somewhere amazing, and you can't cut anything because it'll all fall apart. Yeah, if you need to go more than 20 minutes, you can. Um, but I think this is somewhere where it's good to have a first reader or two. I'm happy to be a first reader for people or a second reader. If you want to send me something, often I'm really good at, oh, you can lift out these two paragraphs and the rest will be fine without it. I've been doing this a while and I know where to make cuts or where to say like, I'm not sure you fleshed this out as much as you could. Like, can you say more about this idea and unpack that more? Um, other questions, other thoughts? Alan, please.
The thought of breathing and making it not so morbid, I think that if you include a little bit of humor at some point, probably at the beginning, it really gets people's attention and it makes them feel that they are part of this process. I know I've watched a lot of acceptance speeches and I've gone to many lectures, and it's the people that do that that really grab my attention.
Yeah, it's a good piece of wisdom to start with some kind of comment that gets the audience on your side and also gives you some feedback that they're with you. And then you can build on that and build your confidence. So some people do that with humor. Um, but something to be aware of with that, uh, if you tell a joke that is unrelated to the sermon, um, I'll give you a piece of wisdom from Nancy Kress, who's a science fiction writer. The beginning of a story or a talk or a paper is kicking off from the side of the pool. Um, and if you kick off from the side of the pool and then you need to start over, you've lost your momentum. So if your joke ties into the meaning of your Dvar or where you're taking your Dvar, then great. But if your joke is unrelated and then you have to come back and start over again, you've lost your momentum and now you're flailing around a little more. So it may make you more comfortable, but beware the trap of like, oh, now I need to start over. Another piece, which, and this is wisdom from Dick Israel, uh, um, don't, if you can avoid it, don't make jokes at your own expense. Don't tell people, I'm sorry you have to listen to me because this is going to be terrible. And sort of insult yourself to head them off at the pass, like, well, now they can't say it because I've said it, and they have to be like, no, it was great. If you do that, uh, people sort of brace themselves like, oh God, this is going to be bad. So like they may chuckle, but they're also kind of bracing themselves. You don't want to do that. Um, so yeah, let's avoid that. Someone asked me to repeat, an hour of time is the minimum for a minute of usable material for writing to delivering. Um, Sometimes it can be quite a bit more than that, especially in the beginning. Uh, so yeah, other thoughts. And like, yeah, I sometimes include puns um at different points in what I'm saying. I think you all know that I'm guilty of that. Um, and if you have a story, let's say you're talking about Moses having a speech impediment, and you tell a joke about, Moses had a choice of where he wanted the promised land to be, and he was trying to tell God California, and he kept saying, and God said, Canaan? I mean, it's a wasteland, but if you want it, you got it. So if you then segue from that into talking about Moses' speech impediments and the other difficulties he may have had in his life, that may work, but be judicious. Um, so yeah. Other questions, other thoughts people have? Elaine.
Through the years, years ago, I've had opportunities not only to write Devas, but speeches, coming back from conventions and so forth. And especially with a Dvar, you want that to really reflect a lot of spiritual insight into what the Torah reading is about. But being a compulsive obsessive, you get ideas. I always keep paper and pencil or whatever by my bedside if I get an idea, and I'll put on the light and scribble it down and put it together. And even before leaving to go to the temple, you open it up again. I think I'm just going to make another little correction. And I don't know whether that's good or bad, but it's my personality and wanting to be everything just right and just so, and having it to come across and be meaningful to the audience. You speak to your audience. You have to know who your audience is when you are talking. And our audience is basically an elder. Now it's more kind of a mixture, but it's an elder congregation and what appeals to them. And I think the one of the most important things to remember is that you need to know your audience as well.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so you had a couple of different points in there. One is the question of if you are constantly brainstorming and tweaking. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Is there a cutoff point? People work in different ways, and especially for something that is near and dear to your heart, there's a tendency to keep going back and tweaking it. I am certainly guilty of that. What I would say is at a certain point, there is diminishing returns because anything that you are adding or deleting, you may have forgotten, oh, I mentioned that earlier in the speech, or oh, now that I've cut that out, this sentence ends abruptly and it doesn't quite make sense. And so you may want to give yourself a cutoff day or a cutoff time of after this, I read it through one last time to make sure it makes sense and I leave it alone. Um, at this point, I've gotten comfortable enough that I can leave certain things in brackets and say, like, here's where I'm telling the story about Honey the Circle Drawer, and I can do that just off the cuff because I know that story. Or uh, here's where I might add this particular idea if it seems like people are responding to me in a way where that idea is welcome. But if it seems like I'm over time or people are not I don't feel like this is quite the right thing to share. It's in brackets. I'll skip it. Um, so I've done that as well, but that's definitely a pro move. Be careful with that because you don't want to trip yourself up if you're new to doing this. You may want to write things out more fully, so that you're not struggling for phrasing in the moment. And you may want only the words on the page so you don't accidentally start reading something that was optional and then feel like, oh, well, now I have to go all the way to the end of that.
I also highlight things that are really important and pausing and you're of course you've got so much more experience and so you can at a moment's notice, change this to no, I think I'm going to switch to this ending and this is story. And but I can't do that. I mean, I have to have it in front of me, big 16, 18 font.
Yeah. So I also I put things in a big font, so that I can read them more comfortably. I make sure that I'm never on a double-sided page. I only have single-sided pages. And that I am never uh, the bottom of a page should never be the middle of a sentence. I always find the last paragraph before the page break and hit return after that or hit enter after that to get the next sentence onto a new page so that I'm not like pausing in the middle, like, and it's, oh, 2 pages. No, yeah, there we go. Yeah. Number your pages. That's also a big thing. And I will put in brackets the word pause or breathe when I want people to sit with ideas and I want to make sure my adrenaline doesn't mean that I rush onward, before it really sinks in.
And that's why I color code and when I highlight.
Yeah, yeah.
That's, and
Okay. Yeah. Elaine, I want to make sure that other people have a chance. Any more thoughts? We've got about 10-ish minutes. Arthur, please.
Okay. Um, for people that are watching, if it's your first time doing the Dvar Torah, as an example, uh, and you didn't mention this, but you when I did mine, you were very helpful. And one of the things you told me was that you would like to see the finished version before I actually presented it. So if people out there are thinking, well, gee, I'm not going to get it right or whatnot, they have you as a terrific resource. And I just wanted to pass that along.
Thank you. Yeah, I am very, very happy to help at any stage of the writing if people need help brainstorming or if they want me to look at a draft. But I definitely want to look at the final version before it goes up in order to head some of these issues off at the pass and make sure, like, yes, what you've got is something that you're comfortable delivering. Yeah, so thank you for that plug.
You're welcome.
Um, other questions, other comments? Okay. All right. So, oh, Phil, please.
Very beginning, did you have all of this put up somewhere so that we can print and have it as reference?
Yes. So, Christine sent this out to everyone who has signed up for the course. And we'll also have the recording and a link to the PDF available to people.
we printed it. It's great to have, and then you can make notes. I like to keep this so that I have notes while you're talking. I can add it right to the document.
Ah, smart. Yeah. But yeah, some people have a hard time um, processing visually and orally at the same time. So I want to make sure that everyone had that.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Um, so it's been wonderful doing this with you. Some of you are already seasoned pros at doing Divrei Torah, and I look forward to hearing more amazing Divrei Torah from you. And some of you are either new to this or I haven't personally heard you yet, in which case I'm looking forward to it. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for the class.
My pleasure.